Kia ora koutou katoa. Welcome to the Hoon, where co-host Peter Bale and I go around the week's news in geopolitics and Aotearoa's political economy with a whole bunch of experts, academics and politicians, all to understand our worlds better and have some fun. Well, kia ora to everyone and welcome into the Hoon. This is our weekly lap around the news of the week for the kaka. And remember, people, the Hoon, a Hoon is the plural, a group of kaka, the bird.
Collective noun.
Collective noun, yes. So this is what we do. We go for a Hoon as a group of kaka around the world's news and geopolitics and the economy and climate change and all sorts of things. And there's been an enormous amount of news this week. It seems like it just keeps coming at us, whether we like it or not. Peter?
Well, as we know, there's one particular person driving all the news, Bernard. And if he's not on the front, we're living in his world. But I was thinking, just speaking about kaka, did you talk to Sharon Murdoch about whether you could get a copy of her cartoon of the kaka a couple of weeks ago? Because I sent it to you and you'd already seen it, I think. And Sharon Murdoch is one of my oldest friends, or more particularly her sister Wendy, is who's still, after many, many years, the court correspondent for the Post in Wellington. Sharon is an old friend, and God, she's a good cartoonist. I think she's one of the most interesting and clever cartoonists, next to Peter Brooks, actually, from the Times, I would say.
Yeah, I think we're blessed for cartoonists in this country. Rod Emerson is of the top order as well.
He is,
and I always have a giggle at Chris Slane, and there's some new ones coming through as well. I think we're very lucky, and heaven help us when these newspapers shut down and we don't have cartoons like that anymore in the same way. It's one of the reasons you buy paper, I think, and you keep buying the paper because you like the cartoons.
Yeah, I wonder, actually, I'm surprised in a way that such stuff hasn't talked to Sharon. They probably have talked to Sharon about turning hers into sort of video clips or TikToks. But I just, I love the considered aspect of it, the silliness and the pathos. Pathos and bathos. I always forget what bathos actually is, but pathos and bathos.
Yes, and you can say some pretty tough things with a cartoon that you maybe can't with a comment piece or even an article. And sometimes, you get nailed as a politician much better by a cartoonist than by some boring
and often in many politicians' places, I'm sure this is true in New Zealand too, but you go to their offices in Parliament or somewhere or their homes, and they've got even the ones that skewered them the best, because I'm always reminded, and I think it was Enoch Powell even who said that a politician who complains about journalists is like a fisherman complaining about the sea.
Exactly, which Donald Trump does have a problem with that.
Yes. I saw him today, Bernard, attacking an ABC journalist, ABC, owned by Disney. And he almost literally, because he was asked about some of the appalling things that Pam Bondi, the US Attorney General, said yesterday about freedom of speech and hate speech and so on. And Trump said, I think you're the problem. You're the problem. I've just got $16 million from you guys. You're the problem. It's getting very dark. It's getting very, very dark. And as you know, I've been away, Bernard.
I'm glad you got out of the States and back here. That's good.
Well, I apologize. Yes, I'm not sitting in a Louisiana prison with people doing appalling things to me. But
how are the crocodiles?
Crocodiles I could deal with, I think. But or as alligators, as I think I've possibly said before, my father used to say, allegations have been made and we intend to find the alligators. But I talked to Michael Wolff, my friend, who's doing. If anybody hasn't watched it yet, I thoroughly recommend his daily Instagram sort of 90 seconds to 2-minute bursts. It's pretty shocking because there's very few other people who are kind of really going inside the mind of Donald Trump, which is a scary place. He also has a very good podcast running, not that we promote other podcasts, but on the Daily Beast, which I think is called Inside Trump's Brain. But one of the problems I feel,
That's not a place I want to be, but
yeah,
I'm glad someone has to do it. Yeah.
well, one of the problems I feel at the moment, Bernard, but with us all just being away from it and so on, and kind of living in this environment, is that one of the things that Michael pushes is that Trump is an idiot and a moron and unable to concentrate on anything, and is just desperate to keep Epstein out of the discussion. And in fact, Michael's because it was brought up with the Pam Bondi thing yesterday, Michael has come out again and explained in gruesome detail the pictures that he says Epstein showed him on more than one occasion of Trump in pretty unpleasant circumstances with young women, very young women, with their tops off and laughing at him in various circumstances. And I think those are the things that we're not seeing. But I don't think it's enough to just laugh it off, because we've got troops on the street in Washington State and Oregon, Illinois, I think is Chicago is coming.
And Trump threatening to use the Insurrectionist Act from 1800 and something to
1800 and something, yes, exactly,
to take over the country while the government is shut down, while there is no reliable official data on the world's largest economy to tell us where to go.
Isn't that handy?
Yeah, well, it means, hey, we can just have a rally in the stock market regardless. We don't have to worry about reality. We can just go for it. Or in the gold price, which, over 4,000 US dollars an ounce.
You're following my script, Bernard. That's bloody unusual for you.
Keep a broad eye on it. Yeah.
Yeah. So this, just tell us a bit more about this, because what are the implications for New Zealand of gold going through $4,000? The Federal Reserve looking a bit shaky, inability to see US data, and the Bank of England this week warning about an overheating stock market driven by the AI boom.
It does.
Do we need to be battening down a couple of hatches at least?
Well, it does feel a lot like that period. I don't know if you remember back in 1996 when Alan Greenspan came out and said he was worried about irrational exuberance. 1996. Well, the market kept rising for another 3 years before it went bang. And a lot of that period, 1996 to 2000, was when an enormous amount of money was spent laying optic fiber cables, setting up internet exchanges, essentially building the architecture of the internet. It cost a lot of money, and shareholders paid for it. And then, of course, when the bubble went bang, those companies which paid for it went bust. The cables didn't go away, just the companies, and the investors in those particular companies lost their shirts. And you do wonder if we're going to see the same thing with AI. It's an extraordinary amount of money going in. We're starting to see some rather complicated and smelly-looking financial vehicles used to, buy things in a circular way involving a lot of paper. And, NVIDIA and the likes, we've never seen a more unbalanced stock market in our time.
It's like it's 10 stocks driving everything. Yep.
Yeah. And also at the same time, essentially we've had the most ginormous amount of money printing over the last 20 years, really. And some of it's been sucked up again, but not all of it. And you can see there's a bunch of people who have fundamentally lost faith in, the fiat money system that the United States dominates, not to the extent that they're moving a lot of their assets out of US dollars, but they're moving into just a few things here and there, Bitcoin, a bit of gold, and just to keep themselves, a little bit
diversified. It's interesting that Bitcoin really is the new gold in a sense. And we're seeing some of the big US financial institutions, not least the president, but the sort of people with genuine, some people like JP Morgan, organizations like JP Morgan that were very concerned that it was just a scam. It's now an investable asset.
Well, yeah, I don't pretend to give financial advice, but I personally would hide under a desk and stay well clear of that stuff. Gold, you can actually use that for things.
But what are the implications for New Zealand? We've got a certain amount of, we had a 50 basis, or do you want to push this to the end of the show?
No, I'm happy to say that New Zealand is not so exposed to this, apart from through people's KiwiSaver funds. Our currency is well traded, and if the world was to go bang, I actually think there'd just be a lot more money printing, as we've seen 2008, 2011, 2014, 2020, 2021. There is no end to the amount of money that can be printed to solve this problem. And in a way, we saw a slight echo of it this week with the Reserve Bank. I wouldn't call it panicking, but certainly moving with rapidity to deal with an economy that just will not grow like everyone's expecting. So they slashed the official cash rate 0.5%, and people are now talking about an official cash rate with a 1 in front of it. So how long before we get back down to zero again and start printing money? Who knows?
But that's not enough, is it? Yeah, it's very interesting, Bernard, because I think the shock will be enormous if it comes. As just, and again, full disclosure, I talked about my investments in Oracle, which was only tiny, but my AMD investment went up, again, tiny through Sharesies. It's just a little bit of dabbling, but lots of people have got real money in this.
Yeah,
and we're all generating heat with it, which is an excellent segue through to Catherine Dyer.
Oh, so good. So many data centers chewing up so much power. I mean, it is a real thing. We've got a stock market boom fueled by companies who are literally building new power stations to run these chips that they're making. And it's a significant new addition to demand for power, which is causing...
Which, if we hadn't privatised New Zealand's power, we might be developing some more hydro for.
Well, or a whole bunch of things. There's going to be places, Australia, Saudi Arabia, anywhere with an awful lot of sun, and we've got plenty of sun too, where there's going to be an awful lot of these solar farms and batteries set up. Catherine, we've had
Catherine, really good to see you. I'm sorry I've been away. I've missed you terribly.
No, I missed you too, Peter.
And in the last couple of days, we've had some big new climate change news. Firstly, from the Ministry for the Environment and Stats NZ, Catherine, who have put out an interesting report. And if you think the only thing that matters in the world are house prices and interest rates, well, certainly house prices and real estate agents should perk up and have a look at this report, because it told us a few things about our risks around climate change, not the least of which around our houses.
Yeah, so this is part of a series of reports that that are put out every 3 years, and the one I think that we're specifically talking about was looking at the marine environment in particular, and yeah, it had some really interesting numbers in there. So they're saying that the water around in the sea around New Zealand is heating or warming 34% faster than the international average. And this is a lot to do with things like some of the ocean currents around us and wind effects, and just as a smallish island, we get affected by that quite a bit. We've heard a lot of talk in recent years about the number of marine heat waves that have been happening and the persistence of them. Like they go on for a really long time and keep reoccurring, and so that's having big impacts, but also things like ocean acidification and the risk that presents to fishing industries and to any water-based industries. Rising sea level, that's a biggie. So in this report, they identified 219,000 coastal homes worth around $180 billion that are vulnerable to coastal inundation and as well as inland flood zones. So this is they're vulnerable to extreme weather events that are quite aside from from rising sea levels as well. They estimated that 1,300 homes that would are set to get more than 20% damaged in extreme weather events between 2026 and 2060. There is also some $26 billion of government infrastructure at risk. So this is streets and all the piping that goes underneath roads and lights and all that sort of thing. We have hundreds of landfills that are at risk from rising sea levels.
There's one in particular down in Southland, which just keeps falling into the sea as it gets eaten away, which is horrible at the moment.
Is that a Tiwai? Is that a Tiwai?
No, it's further around from Invercargill, and they've got real problems about what do they do with the whole township and what do they do with this with this landfill. There are a lot of places like this where people have just filled up gullies. They've just found, the bit of scrubby bit out of the back of town, which is right next to the river. Those sorts of areas which are a problem. And Catherine, also a really good piece this week from Michael Baker's Operation of Public Health Communications group, talking about the health issues around climate change, which I think is really important to sort of reinforce it, that not only is it expensive, it's unhealthy.
Yeah, this is interesting. Actually, the lead author on that piece was James Renwick, and I spoke to him a couple of times this morning, but not about the subject, unfortunately, so I missed my opportunity to grill him a little bit. Yeah, a really good article. There's been a big piece that came out just recently globally in Nature Climate Change that was looking at health risks from climate change and the improvement in attribution studies. And some of the studies specifically that they looked at were based here. So Ilan Noy, for instance, at Victoria University does a lot of work in this area and it's quite at the forefront of doing that sort of work. So that study itself was interesting. And then this piece that James Renwick and others have written, the PHCC piece that you're talking about, basically they're saying that a lot of the health impacts from climate change have not been given a lot of attention, particularly down here in Aotearoa. That government policies are inadequate to deal with some of these things that are coming out. The policy solutions often to health impacts often lie outside of healthcare. You have to deal with them in other policies, and particularly your policy settings around areas like agriculture, housing, energy and transport, and that we have industries that are actively trying to block things from happening, interest groups that are stopping transformation from happening in those areas, and that has direct health impacts on people. So some of those health impacts, some of them are direct in terms of loss of life from extreme weather events, but you also get big effects from things like if you have a lot of drought and then you have fire and then you have pollution from the fire, which has health effects on people in terms of asthma and stuff like that. Globally, some 1.5 million people have died from air pollution related to fires. So that's quite important. And then there's all sorts of indirect other things as well, like microbial contaminants. We're getting new diseases and new disease vectors because of the heating atmosphere. So that's starting to have an impact on people. You have things like food production, which can be affected by extreme storms and droughts and all of that as well. And so then globally, and water availability as well, that is pushing up food prices globally, which then starts to have an impact on people that are living on low incomes, the quality of the food that they can eat, that can start to have health impacts as well.
It's painful, really,
also
to
psychological. Sorry, go ahead.
No, it's painful to think that so many of these health problems are actually caused directly by fossil fuels, let alone the indirect on climate change. And if only you were able to quickly move away from fossil fuels to renewable electricity. All of these diesel fumes, the WHO's clearly labelled diesel as the cause of many health conditions, fatal particulates from fossil fuels. Not to mention, there's a great report from ECA in the last couple of weeks talking about the issues around gas, domestic gas in New Zealand. It's painful to see our government slow pedalling on shifting gas out of homes, and also have reached first for let's just get some LNG into the country. This week again, Simon Watt's talking about, well, I'd be quite happy if it was a big terminal. We need to stop burning gas. We need to stop burning oil. We need to have clean air and much safer, equipment, apart from anything else. If you move to renewable energy, you get rid of a lot of these issues and other types of transport.
Yeah, there's a whole raft of side benefits to making those transformations in those sectors that just really don't get counted very well, but that is something that is improving a lot in terms of the attribution, but also then being able to say, well, here are some of the economic side benefits of actually making those moves. So that's good as well. One of the other important things to point out is the level of of inequality. A lot of these, when you're not creating great adaptation policies, or you're not really thinking ahead of how you're going to deal with these things, you end up exacerbating these inequities, which makes the situation, it kind of doubles down for people whose needs aren't sort of being taken into account. So, yeah. All in all, it's a good report, a good reminder of
just remind us who the reporters. Just remind us who the reporters from, Catherine, because we've been talking about it for quite some time, and I think people, it's easy to lose the track of it. Whose report is it, and where can it be found?
So you can find it on the phcc.org website. That's the Public Health Centre, which is run out of Otago University. It's and as Bernard mentioned, Michael Baker is, I think, heads that unit or plays a large part in it. And that particular article was written by a raft of authors, but the lead author was James Renwick.
Thank you very much.
And there was also an excellent Ministry for the Environment and Stats NZ piece that came out this week on the effects of climate change on our coastal environment. And I'll put both of those links in the show notes that go out with the Hoon in recorded form tomorrow morning. And they're both great, useful reports on what's happening. It would be great to see our politicians read them. And actually, talking of the marine environment, a milestone, at least in my part of the world, the third reading of the Act to cordon off some parts of the Hauraki Gulf as
some parts,
not enough, but some
basically
parts
only where you're swimming, Bernard, because they're going to. Bernard, you're not going to be able to take beach glass off the beach anymore.
I don't know.
I think that counts
some
as
good bits here. Got some really good bits here.
There's another slightly related report that I just want to get a little plug in for as well, from Amnesty International. This is to do with the marine issues that we're talking about in Aotearoa, also affecting the Pacific Islands and many low-lying countries. And so they are asking particularly New Zealand to take more of a deeper look into how we support people from the Pacific Islands and support them with humanitarian visas and stuff coming.
Good luck with
New
that.
Zealand.
Speaking of small nations gathering together to become stronger, here we have thank you, Catherine. We have Professor Robert Patman.
Yep.
Now, Robert,
great segue.
Good evening.
Very disappointed not to see you last week, because I was going to set us up for a tiny weeny stoush, lowercase stoush, which of course is a word that's only used in New Zealand and Australia, about the Winston Peters decision not to recognise a putative Palestinian state. But we've moved along from that, really, because I thought it was actually quite an intelligently framed statement, although I was shocked to read the Thomas Munch piece that he didn't in fact consult his civil servants about it, that it was essentially written out of his office.
Foundations as well.
But we've moved along a bit, and he's issued another statement today, which you sent me a little note on. Which Winston has welcomed this apparent alleged agreement in Egypt between Hamas and Israel and the other parties for the first stage of what amounts to effectively the hostages being released to some extent, and a list has gone to Israel, which perhaps it's been agreed since I started this, but of Palestinian inmates to be released from Israeli prisons. What do you make of this alleged progress? Sorry, okay. I'm a skeptic, so I'm saying alleged progress.
Well, I think it's welcome, given the unimaginable suffering that so many people have experienced in Gaza. I mean, we're talking at a time when 90% of the population have had their homes destroyed. The entire entire Gaza Strip's been reduced to rubble. Hospitals and universities have been destroyed, and 90% of the population has been displaced. And 500,000 Palestinians are currently facing starvation. So given that backdrop, I think anything that brings a ceasefire must be welcome news. The phase one of the deal, as I understand it, is that the hostages will be the last remaining hostages, 48 of them, that's 28 deceased and 20 alive, will be released perhaps as early as the weekend. And in return, Israel will release something about 200 or 250 long-term detainees, Palestinian detainees. The other welcome bit of news is that not only will there be a ceasefire to facilitate that, but also there'll be unfettered, unrestricted distribution of humanitarian aid, and the UN will take over the operation. The Israeli-American startup called the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation hasn't performed particularly brilliantly since it got into action. But, you know, since this plan has been floated, between 50 and 100 Palestinians have been dying daily through the continuation of this bombardment. It's not a war, it's the military onslaught. You're not talking about a battle between two equals. So, yes, this is a welcome step, but of course, let's hope first phase one is implemented successfully. The rubber hits the road with phase two. My understanding, phase two is when, oh, by the way, one thing we haven't discussed is that under phase one, Israel is supposed to withdraw its forces back to an agreed area.
With that. But they also want a significant, you know, there's a significant percentage of Gaza that will still be under the control of the Israelis, which is both understandable but also very difficult. Now, I wonder if we could address perhaps, Robert, how we got here in a sense, because it seems to me that this is a combination of diplomacy but also exhaustion and probably Netanyahu overreaching himself by attacking Qatar, which then led
I think you've just put your finger on the crucial reason. I don't think Mr. Trump was deeply moved by the fact that 80% of the Palestinian victims of this conflict are civilians. But I think he was very concerned about the Qatari reaction to the Israeli bombing. America has its biggest base in the Middle East, in Qatar. And it wasn't just Qatar. Saudi Arabia, which has had its own differences with Qatar over the years, quickly expressed full solidarity and said the Israeli action was completely unacceptable and intolerable.
Yeah, so there's leverage. There's leverage to Netanyahu, against Netanyahu,
and they elicited a promise from Mr. Trump that will never happen again. And I think that gave Trump some leverage over Netanyahu. I mean, he's always had leverage. He's just chosen not to, to use it. But he thought it was timely to use it.
But what do you make, Robert, though, of all of the other, Britain, certainly the Gulf states, the other signatories to the Abraham Accords, which I think includes Morocco, and most of the Gulf states. I think Sudan, although maybe Sudan doesn't have any government really at the moment. But what do you make of sort of mature, sensible Western governments falling in behind this? Because from my perspective, it is really hard to see this actually lasting in any sensible way.
Mature, sensible Western liberal democracies have shown a real lack of courage in the last 2 years, including our own government. Let's be quite clear about this. Mr. Trump is putting a tremendous spin on what's doing, but the United States has exercised their veto 6 times in the last 2 years, which has perpetuated this carnage. And in a sense, it's trying to retrieve an appalling and actually a situation can only be described as a stain on humanity. For those generations that were affected by the 30s and lived through the war period, and of course that excludes all of us, but for those generations, they must be looking on, they must be deeply disappointed that our current leaders have no sense of history and did not act when military force is being used with impunity.
Okay, let me make a prediction, Robert.
Yep.
and because you've got Jared Kushner, who deserves some credit for the Abraham.
Well known. We're Middle Eastern specialists.
Yeah, but he deserves some credit for the Abraham Accords, conceivably.
Yeah, well, no, he doesn't, because the Abraham Accord doesn't actually. All it does is, the Abraham Accord is one of the reasons Hamas launched that terrorist atrocity. The problem with the Trump peace plan is that it does not recognize a fundamental right which is enshrined in the UN Charter, that peoples have the right to political self-determination. Unfortunately, this deal will get into serious trouble in the second phase, as you've already hinted, Peter, because there is no absolute commitment that the Palestinians, as opposed to Hamas, who are many people in the Palestinian community have no time for Hamas, but they have not got a cast iron guarantee that they will be allowed to exercise the peaceful political right of self-determination.
Okay, so let me say, within 90 days, probably within 30, I'd like to make a little small prediction that we're going to see Trump and Netanyahu again meeting and saying, we offered the olive branch and now we're going to obliterate it, and Egypt will have to open its doors to the Palestinians from Gaza.
I might have agreed with you in March of this year, because we're going through a bit of deja vu here.
All over again. Deja vu all over again.
Netanyahu had the chance to have all the hostages released in March when he got to the second phase of the first Trump peace ceasefire deal. What did he do? He decided to unilaterally exit the deal. It wasn't Hamas that left the deal, and he resumed the war because he preferred war to the release of all hostages, which many Israelis hold Netanyahu to account for.
But it is interesting.
Bernard, please come in.
That's
I'm going to ask you. I want to ask you a question, Bernard, too. Actually,
it is interesting that fundamentally Netanyahu says he will never allow a Palestinian state in Gaza. The Arab countries believe that the second phase involves some sort of independent state, or certainly Palestinian self-determination. And it just seems to me, yes, you'd have a ceasefire and possibly an Israeli pullout. But until you have that fundamental agreement, which at one point Israel sort of agreed to, but not under Netanyahu, you sort of wonder if anything's ever going to change until he's gone from the scene, if there's some sort of election change next year.
His views are widely supported. The Great Israel Project of absorbing Gaza and annexing the West Bank, which is the official position of the Israeli government, has a lot of support, probably around about 70% support. And, we're in an extraordinary situation. But to just come back to Peter's point, I think...
Jesus, did I actually manage to make one, Robert?
Well, you said...
They're not usually coherent, but...
Within 30 days, the Peter Bale prediction, within 30 days, will be Netanyahu and Trump to say, well, they gave the Palestinians a chance, but unfortunately, we have to resume the conflict or whatever.
Yeah.
I think that is a pretty reasonable supposition, but there's a big difference this time round from the first ceasefire. And that is a lot of Arab countries and Muslim countries, including Turkey, have played a key part in getting this deal. And I don't think they're going to roll over lightly if Netanyahu and Trump say that. And it's very interesting listening to some of the pronouncements of Saudi Arabia and Qatar. They said nothing less than a two-state solution will suffice. And Israel's continued occupation of those lands, East Jerusalem and Gaza and West Bank, will be an obstacle to that. I mean, you're quite right. We're going to reach a point where, and this is the extraordinary thing which much of the media glossed over. Netanyahu said, barely as the ink was dry on the 20-point peace plan, he will never allow a Palestinian state, which point 20 in point 19 of the plan actually envisages that possibility.
Which is what I mean. Has Trump ever done anything that involves 21 points and 21 stages that he actually comprehends? Just let me ask you, really, and also Bernard, I mean, because you've been closer to this lately, we've had Winston Peters doing that statement that I thought was not completely mad, the one, a couple of weeks ago. He's now had his house, attacked allegedly by people doxing him. What do you and Bernard take to be the New Zealand domestic position on this in terms of the public? Where does the public sit on this? Do we have a good idea on that, Bernard / Robert?
I'll quickly jump in here with what I think is the political
And not just on Waiheke, Bernard. You've got
temperature.
to be the whole country, not just Waiheke.
No. There's actually not an awful lot of public polling that's been done on this issue, other than broad things and leading questions and online polls, which aren't very useful. But if I had to take the temperature of just reading around, I think the government's position in not lining up with Australia, UK, Canada, in calling for a Palestinian state just looked weak and mealy-mouthed and just not the New Zealand way. And I think regardless of, which side you're on or so, it looks like this government's been captured by a very aggressive pro-Israeli group that is connected to ACT in particular, and that the Prime Minister has not asserted himself in the cabinet. It's just another symptom of National being led around by the nose by ACT and New Zealand First. And it is sort of, I think you can see the echoes of it in the polling, the general polling about right track, wrong track, and the political parties. And I think that it's not something that will change an election, but it's definitely that the decision was out of step with the public's view.
Great. So, Bernard, we'll come back to that at the end. Will we about sort of the coalition, or we'll do that then?
Sure.
Well, Robert, what do you make of it about public sentiment?
I broadly agree with Bernard. I think the government's position, as articulated by Christopher Luxon, is that some people are pro-Israeli and some people are pro-Palestinian, and we're sticking with both. The thing is that as fundamental issues are at stake in this conflict, and New Zealand can't duck these issues. All governments since 1945 in this country have held up a vision that international relations should be based on rules and laws, and they have been absolutely trashed in the last 2 years in Gaza, and we should be uncomfortable with that, and we should have a voice on that. And there's another thing here about how it doesn't sit comfortably with the New Zealand identity, national identity, because this country's founding document, the Treaty of Waitangi, is based on the idea, the vision. It hasn't always been implemented well, but it's based on an aspiration of cooperation between the indigenous people and the settlers. And in the last 2 years, we have witnessed a situation where some settlers in the West Bank, backed by the Netanyahu government, seem to be in the business of evicting and dispossessing the indigenous Palestinians that live there, which leave.
While we accept the principle, presumably, or Robert, do you accept the principle that Jews are indigenous to that land?
I accept that, Jews are indigenous to that land, but so are the Palestinians. And this is why you have to have a solution which recognizes the right of self-determination for both of them. And Mr. Rabin reached that point in the early 90s.
And paid a rather high price for
it. Didn't accept.
Yeah.
And we're seeing the consequences now. You can't kill your way to security. The idea that you can just
that is a brilliant. Have you used that phrase somewhere else? Because that's a doozy. You can't kill your way to security. Is an extreme. I know, but I think that should be the lead of your ODT column. It's certainly going to be the lead of Bernard's description of this in the Kaka.
Well, look, you think you can't kill close to 70,000 Palestinians, 80% of whom are civilians, and not experience serious blowback in the not too distant future, nor will those countries that have facilitated that, such as the United States. And you can't rule out other acts of extremism in the not too distant future. And, in a sense, coming back to Bernard's point, I think most countries, look, obviously I'm an academic. My contact with the general public is confined to contact with, I get to speak to farmers and people like this. One thing that struck me all along, speaking to Rotary organizations, business organizations, student organizations, is a position which is different from the government's, which is many people feel there is a difference between right and wrong. And there is serious wrongs going on in this situation. So I think many Kiwis have been very uncomfortable with this situation. What I found interesting is in the government statement today, in the last paragraph.
Yeah, please elaborate on that, because I thought that was a doozy.
The protesters over Gaza join with the government in applauding the Trump peace initiative. Well, I think he should be proud of New Zealand's citizens, as well as citizens in other liberal democracies that have protested, because they've shown an awareness of respect for international law and human rights. And surely a democratically elected government would be entirely happy with protests on that basis.
I think we'll find, Robert, that was a shitty little comment from a foreign minister who has gone very domestic in his thinking, whose house was threatened this week, which was unpleasant.
No, and there was
but who's also made the absolute most of it.
Absolutely unacceptable.
Yeah,
but but you can't say that people. I mean, I'm very concerned this week that with 4 New Zealand citizens in that peaceful flotilla of ships, unarmed people trying to deliver aid to Gaza, they were intercepted international waters, detained and taken to Israel against their will. Have we heard a whimper out of many liberal democracies, including our own? Apart from Spain, we haven't heard very much.
Yeah.
Well, I think,
but Winston, described them as a bunch of grandstanding keffiyeh wearing protesters. The same, he mocked them. He mocked their legitimate.
Yeah, but he's
protests.
mocking international law in the process. He's saying it's fine to live in a world where the principle of might is right. You have to be very careful on this. I would expect a far more robust response from a government which says that it wants to stand up for New Zealand values in the world. I'm not seeing that.
Robert, before we go to our next guest, you've read the 21 terms. Is there anything in there about the International Criminal Court and the International Court of Justice, which of course neither the United States nor Israel recognize? But is there any pressure there? I mean, apart from indicting them and also now the United States sanctioning the ICC and the ICJ, what happens now, do you think, before we get the asymmetrical haircut women on from The Hague? What happens with those cases?
Well, it's very difficult to predict, but you have pinpointed what I think is another second major anomaly in the Trump peace plan, which is a refusal to hold those account, both those terrorists who carried out that appalling attack on Israel on the 7th of October, but also the war crimes that have been carried out in Israel's Mighty Vengeance campaign, where there seems to be a real difference in an inability to distinguish between civilian and military targets. So, I mean, I think the ICC and the International Court of Justice will continue their work. And in fact, it might even intensify once a ceasefire takes hold. So, yeah, Israel and the US, they clearly are acting in a way at the moment which shows scant regard for international law.
Total disregard, I would have thought.
I find it disturbing that so many liberal democracies pass over in silence when a country like Israel illegally detains people in international waters. I mean, the implications of that, why if China did that?
I think we know something of it. Didn't France do that? And
and we didn't like it.
What did that lead to?
We actually, I think, took legal action against France. But I'm disappointed that the foreign minister and the government generally, to be fair, didn't actually take a robust line on this, because the implications are pretty profound.
Yeah, I think we've seen. Look, all right, let's just state this, because people on we've got a nice feed of generally liberal people who really appreciate your energy and vigor tonight and your expertise. I often, in my mind, when I hear what's happened in Gaza overnight, think about Amalek and the original comments that Netanyahu made immediately after October the 7th. And we are seeing the deliberate obliteration and punishment of a civilian population for the acts of Hamas. This is such a shocking...
This is collective punishment.
Yeah, exactly.
And, this is why I think so many young people find the situation intolerable, not only in this country, but in countries like the Netherlands and now Germany. A remarkable situation developing in Germany, where you're getting protests in, I think it was last weekend, there were 150,000 people protesting against their own government's position of arming Israel.
Yeah, it's interesting. That well-known commentary and highly skilled commentary show, South Park, has if you look at it on YouTube, has a session this week of a Jewish mother going from South Park flying to Jerusalem and confronting Netanyahu with the damage he's doing to Jews around the world. Bernard, are you looking to do a segue here?
No, I think it's going to be very hard to segue into the next group. It's fantastic to have you on, Robert. Thank you very much. This is something that everyone...
Robert, people have loved it and appreciated it. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Bye.
That's great. Well, now I'd like to invite into the Hoon for the first time Israel Cooper, who is the group founder of the Home Foundation, which includes the building operations of the group that has produced 2,000 homes in New Zealand in the last 14 years. Israel...
Does Israel work for Sam Stubbs?
No, he doesn't. They are...
He must work for Mark Todd.
No. Israel's and a group of people are doing some great work building lots of social and affordable homes. And actually, about a decade ago now, and some parts of my brain are gone, but that one is not gone, I remember a fantastic presentation that Israel gave about productivity in the building sector. And it came from sort of an unusual space. I was expecting a discussion about IT and all sorts of things because of Israel's background as a consultant. But it was fascinating, and I'm really glad we've got Israel on now. And of course, so much has happened since then. Israel, thanks very much for coming onto the Hoon.
Kia ora, Bernard. Peter, thank you for having me. I can't believe it's taken us a decade, Bernard.
Yes, no, I'm really glad.
What? We haven't been doing... I mean, it feels like we've been doing this for 10 years, but we haven't.
Yeah. Oh, indeed, sure.
And we're all making progress. It's all good. Israel, could you tell us about what you're doing there with a bunch of people to try to solve what essentially is a market failure, where we can build homes, but only basically big ones for rich people, and we can't seem to build homes for regular people who, are renting or are on something like a reasonable income? What's your plans here?
Yeah, well, I mean, to give a little backstory very quickly. So we began coming up to 15 years ago out of the Christchurch earthquakes, really as a response to what was, again, a kind of a market failure in that case, precipitated by a natural disaster. But there was just a shortage of basically home builders. And my dad, who's the ideas man in the family and had the building background, thought it would be a good idea to participate in the rebuild of the city. In the course of doing that, we realized that there was a large number of families and individuals who were uninsured or underinsured. And so again, another form of kind of market failure. And so we started taking the commercial profits from the commercial rebuild and repair work and using it to subsidize the work for these individuals. And so that was the kind of genesis. Over years, what was a natural disaster, we recognized there was a slowly unfolding human-created disaster, which was our housing crisis. And so this was early 2012, and it was the first stories, if you remember, John Campbell at the time had these first interviews of people living in their cars in Auckland. And this was something we hadn't really seen in New Zealand. And suddenly they just seemed to be everywhere. Now, of course, they had been around for a while, but we hadn't really paid attention, and they were increasing numbers. So we turned our attention then to building, from what we had learned through the Christchurch rebuild, to building more and more affordable housing. We partnered with a number of community housing providers, at that stage Housing New Zealand, as they were sort of, building from a couple hundred a year as they were starting to ramp up to many, many hundreds and into thousands. And in the course of doing that, we also realized that actually as a builder, we were taking our profits and acting effectively as social enterprise and subsidizing more. There was only so much we could do, and actually the developer piece was an important part to unlock increasing larger scale communities, and particularly communities that addressed a need. And oftentimes our housing market responds to demand, But demand is economically driven, and demand is for a cohort who can afford housing. The need often the market doesn't deliver. And so we recognize that the need, we saw this in Christchurch, we're seeing it around the country, the need was in that lower cost and that middle market housing. So there was some happening in social housing that was starting to build. The market was largely delivering, but that middle market was missing. So we set up a development entity and we started taking then those profits we'd been generating and put that into developments. Fast forward a number of years later, we set up the Home Foundation as a charitable trust, which now owns the construction company and the development company, and the profits from that have been going up into the Home Foundation and then reinvested back into mixed.
So, Israel, do you operate sort of in parallel to the housing associations, or are you a housing association?
We're a registered community housing provider. So we have an entity called Tiwawa Te Kāinga, which is the fourth entity in our group, which is a tenancy manager. It's a registered community housing provider, but it also provides tenancy, community service, community building work for affordable housing. So this middle market piece. And also progressive home ownership, which we have a progressive home ownership product.
But just to be clear on this, so but essentially your family is running a commercially led but socially conscious set of organizations or businesses that feed on each other and attempt to provide affordable and affordable and social housing. Is that correct?
Yeah, so not our family anymore. My wife and I are just 2 of 8 trustees. It's now a charitable trust that owns 4 commercial entities. Those commercial entities operate across the value chain to deliver mixed tenure, so social housing, affordable housing, market housing, and progressive home ownership across the country. So a capital arm, which provides capital funding, financing, development arm, construction arm, and tenancy management.
So, Israel, may I ask before, but I did a piece recently for the listener on Kaingora, on what I think is the destruction of Kaingora. What do you make of Kaingora's withdrawal from much of its work and purpose? Can you guys and the Community Housing Association, the community housing people, fill that gap in any meaningful way?
We believe we can. We wouldn't be doing this if we didn't believe we could. New Zealand's got a small but a very competent, in my view, community housing sector. They just have relatively weak balance sheets, and so that makes it difficult for them to sort of grow capital in large scale. They are doing what they can. And I think some of the recent changes with CHIFA, the Community Housing Funding Agency, the government providing guarantees for banks to fund the CHIPs, is going to go a large way to addressing that kind of capital shortage that the CHIPs have. But in terms of tenancy management, knowing their local communities, the wraparound service, the community housing providers in New Zealand are the best in the business. They have deep links, often because they're associated with other social activities within the community. They're connected to local churches and local sports facilities and schools, and they understand their community deeply because they've been part of their community.
But so, Israel, what has been the significance, or what is the significance of Kaingora effectively not building anymore?
Well, obviously, there's been a fairly large construction slowdown in the short term. But the CHIPs now are increasing, the community housing providers are increasingly stepping in, from what we're seeing, stepping into that gap through the recent announcement of a further IRRS, and now with the help with CHIFA.
What's an IRRS?
Income rent related subsidies.
Thank you.
Israel, I'm curious too about how this can be expanded and what you're doing to bring in more capital, because, with the government deciding not to contribute its capital, there's a whole bunch of others around there. And there is big chunks of pension funds and all sorts of philanthropic groups who are looking to help solve this problem. So what are you doing around funneling some of that capital into this house building?
Yeah, and in a way, I mean, this is sort of a bit of a response, Peter, to your question. The government's sort of stepping out on the capital side and just I would reiterate, they are still funding on the operating and the rent subsidy side. That's continuing to grow. It has resulted in organisations like ours. We're about to launch a housing equity fund, which the Home Foundation will be the cornerstone investor of, which will raise impact investment, so equity capital, to fund social and affordable housing around New Zealand. That combined with the Community Housing Funding Agency, which has got this much lower cost of debt, and are doing great jobs raising, just raised their recent bond with ANZ, has reduced the cost of the debt, allowed us to, deliver a lot more than we would have if we had just had traditional bank funding or the minimum equity that we had to begin with. So this third-party equity will expand the Home Foundation's own equity pool and allow us to deliver a lot more than we ordinarily would have been able to.
What are we talking about in terms of scale, the amount of money that could go in and number of houses that could be built?
Yeah, so this first round, so this is our first time that we've gone to wholesale investors. We're raising 67 million, which will deliver about 200 million worth of housing, so about 270, 280 homes across New Zealand. The Home Foundation is putting in the large chunk of that, so about 70%, 47 million. And so we're seeking to raise about another 20 million from third-party investors.
Yeah, I'm curious though. We've got a scale of an issue which is very large, and up until earlier this year, the government was planning, under the previous version of Kāinga Ora and the previous government, was planning 3,000 homes a year. What do you think the community housing sector and associated funds and funding tools can deliver? Is it possible to replace that 3,000 that might not be here in a couple of years' time?
Yeah, Bernard, I think it is. I think it'll take a little bit of time to build, but we don't have a relatively sophisticated. The social housing is not an asset class that is existed in New Zealand. This is a new asset class that is getting built. And in a very short space of time, a number of organisations, both in the debt financing side, and now organisations like ours, we're not the only one. There's the Bay of Plenty Housing Equity Fund. There are others who are starting to do this. So these numbers sound really small now, but I am very confident that in 2 or 3 years' time, those numbers will be talking in the billions, which means we're starting to get to your point, a meaningful replacement of what Kāinga Ora ordinarily was investing in.
Interesting. That's a very Chris Bishop view, Israel.
but I mean, there's nothing to stop both happening at the same time, and that's the thing.
Sure, no, absolutely. And again, but I mean, the IRRS funding is at about $2.5 billion annually. It's growing quite quickly. The accommodation supplements at about just over 2 billion annually. It's growing very quickly. So the government's already investing close to 5 billion a year in housing. So it is putting a lot of money in. I just think we've got to get smarter around the capital side of it as well. And actually, if the government can leverage its balance sheet to get private capital in, it just means we can do a lot more than the government could have on its own.
Israel, just remind us, how many property homes, how many dwellings is Home Foundation providing, and just remind us of the range that you have. Is it still confined pretty much to Christchurch and Canterbury? Not that that's a bad thing. I just wanted to check.
No, we're all over. So Christchurch, Nelson, Hamilton, Auckland, Kerikeri. We've got a development project that's will unlock 150 homes in Tauranga. So no, we're all across the country.
Thank you.
Just one final question, Israel, before we let you go. I'm always keen to ask the sort of basic question of people who've been thinking about this, and I bet you've been thinking about this for decades. How do we solve this fundamental problem? I have a housing view. Housing is everything view of the world, which is, if you can solve this one, you go to solve a way to solve so many of our economic, social, political problems even. And I often think of those amazing times when, under threat of invasion or disaster, governments and people, voters, businesses have turned their entire efforts to solving one problem real fast. And let's invent the atomic bomb in 3 years. Let's build a B29. Let's just do it. And they did it. I wonder what would it take to just do it here. What would you like to see? Because this people say, oh, there's no silver bullet, blah blah. Well, just show me a whole lot of silver bullets, and actually, what would it take to do it?
Land's a challenge. We've got plenty of land in New Zealand. We've got a population, the size of Sydney, and a land mass that's like nearly 2.5, nearly 3 times the size of California. So we're pretty low density as a country, and we're very spread out. That just makes economies, efficiencies, all of this. I mean, I was in Texas last year, and a single housing company over there is building 350,000 houses every year across.
Oh my goodness, yeah.
Their distribution facilities like bigger than Auckland Airport. So we've got a real scale problem in New Zealand when it comes to housing. And our land, we've got oodles of it. We just, for whatever reason, don't want to build on it, or it's expensive to build on because we've got an infrastructure challenge. So I think we've got to figure out the land infrastructure piece. That's one part of it. But we've got to realize housing's it's an ecosystem. And this is why often the silver bullet, because it does. It operates as a system. And you can't just pull one part and just sort of think magically the rest of it will just all solve on its own. So you've got to look at it as a system, and you've got to think about the entire housing continuum at the same time. You've got to think about delivering more market housing. At the same time, you've got to think about delivering more middle market affordable housing. At the same time, you've got to be delivering more social housing. And you've got to create pathways to enable families to move across those. And it's not always up. Sometimes it's down, but we've got to work harder at fixing that security of tenure piece for families. Because if we can fix that, I think.
That was a very big part of that story I did in Kaikoura with people talking about security of tenure, even if it's rental tenure. I mean, and that's where people like Mark Todd and Sam Stubbs are very clever on, I think, or understanding of the dilemma.
Just finally, Israel, do you think you and others are now starting to build the scale to be able to solve particularly the densification, multiple townhouses, 4-story apartments thing, which our traditional house building sector, thousands of mums and dads with one ute and a dog and an occasional subby every now and again can't really solve. Can we build the scale here?
Yeah, I think we can, Bernard. 10 years ago, there were very few builders in New Zealand who could build more than 3 levels. As a consequence of what KO's doing, and then other organizations like Simplicity Living, ourselves, there is a lot of builders who can build good density, good quality. And the more we build, they're going to just get better and better and more and more efficient. And we're seeing that year after year as we build 3, 4, 5, 6 levels. We get better at it. Our architects get better at it. Our engineers get better at it. Our councils understand it more. And we are getting more efficient. We've just got to keep doing it. And if we keep doing it, I'm confident we're just going to bring the overall cost down.
All right. I see an event, Bernard, for you with Israel and Sam Stubbs and
we'll solve all the problems.
Just bring a few people together to discuss this, because I wonder whether the problem is economic growth and ambition, but I'm just going to leave that little there. And we have to. Bernard has already said the final question to you twice now, Israel, which is normally the way it works.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for coming on.
What wonderful to chat. Thank you so much.
Thanks,
I'm
guys.
glad we
Appreciate
got you in.
Thanks so much.
Got you on after a decade. It's
Indeed.
good.
Cheerio.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Yeah. So Bernard, poor old Simon's asking us to finish. I mean, let's be clear that part of the time when we're moving things forwards is because we have to move things forwards because we know who's coming on and coming off. I don't really have a good skateboarding dog, but I also want to recommend something to people, which again is to promote another person's podcast, but Empire, the Goalhanger podcast from the UK, which I've mentioned before, with William Dalrymple, the historian, and Anita Anand, who's both a historian and a BBC presenter. Their 5-part, I think it is, series in the last 2 weeks on Gaza and the history of Gaza, not the contemporary history, but the ancient history of Gaza, is incredibly valuable to understand that it is not just some kind of sandpit which the UN put people into in 1947. It is one of the crucibles of Levantine Arab
At the
Jewish-
crossroads
It's
between
at the crossroads.
Africa, Europe, and the
And of
Middle
course,
East.
one of the things that's been obliterated to some extent are the archaeological and Roman ruins and various other civilizational ruins. But I just couldn't recommend highly enough listening to
I'll put a link in.
the Gaza episodes of Empire. Bernard, you had a sort of skateboarding dog.
Yes, I will put it as a link in the show notes. I suspect it's one of these jokes that works better when you read it yourself. But essentially,
Oh God, it's not another video one, is it, Bernard?
no.
Jesus Christ.
No. It's sort of quite a serious one, really. But Barry Weiss, who is
Yes.
a propagandist, I think you'd have to say, a polemicist, has just been given control of, I think, CBS News. Is that right?
Correct.
And
She's also a very powerful Substacker, having
Yes.
sold her Substack after she left the New York Times in a tantrum to CBS the Ellison family for $150 million. I'm waiting for you to sell yours to the Ellisons or someone similar.
well, I'd need to adopt some different views, I think. They're very popular views with a certain group of people in the United States. And to be honest, I don't think they're views. They're not news. And it's shocking to me. Anyway, I'll put a great link in here from McSweeney's, which is a sort of a Onion-style website with a mock first memo
Let's
to
talk about
staff.
this more next week, because I am interested in this. I've looked into it quite a bit. I don't know Barry, but I know people who know her. I think we have to think about what the implications of this kind of decision are for New Zealand. We've just seen, I think it was the former head of Goldman Sachs has just been appointed in New Zealand, has just been appointed to be the chairman of TVNZ. There's a lot of moving parts in any media industry that has been weakened the way it has, and few of them have been weakened as much as New Zealand. So let's watch this space. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, everyone. We'll see you all next week. Ka kite anō. Bye-bye.